passed the budget out on Sunday. Of course, the last couple of years we have taken a lot of the drama out of it by rolling things out the week prior to release on Sunday. So you've heard about our pay plan for state employees, state police, etc. You heard some things about this 10th and 10th and school divisions. So today what we're going to have is our staff go through all of the different areas of the budget, talk about the amendments and answer any questions that you might have. As you know, tomorrow at noon, amendments must be on the clerk's desk from members, amendments to the budget. And I think, Steve, by 11 o'clock on Thursday, any objections to the items that are included in our report must be submitted to the clerk as well. So with that, Robert and his staff will walk you through, and please feel free at any time to stop and ask any questions. If you've got something that needs a little more detailed explanation, we can do that offline. So thank you very much for being here, and Robert, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the members that are here to get this briefing. Just to reiterate what the chairman was saying about floor amendments, if you have any, please come by. The staff will help you craft them, but of course it will be your responsibility then to actually submit it to the clerk's dais. But if you give it to the clerk, we'll end up getting it anyway and putting it in the right format so that it will resemble the half sheets that you all are used to seeing. Let me start by turning off my phone so we know who to call. What I'd like to do, just give you a sort of a top line, sort of how we went about the process under the chairman's guidance. We start early. We actually start having these discussions. In this case, we started having discussions back in August, both with Secretary Brown and then having conversations with our Senate counterparts at that time as we were looking how to close the revenue hole of $1.5 billion. Then we switched gears and started talking when the governor's budget came out, and there was a little more resources available. He had proposed some spending initiatives, if you will, and we began that discussion with the subcommittee chairman before the session began. And then we followed that with 6 small group meetings. And all those are very important to us as we, one, like to share, I hope you all are sensing the transparency that we talk about things that we're thinking of doing. I know we touched on the small school issue. We talked about employee compensation. And so those were things that were emerging. We talked about salary increases for teachers versus, say, fulfilling the commitment that the committee endeavored last session by getting reestablishing the lottery and sending back 40% to your school divisions unencumbered. So again, those were all the pieces that really began to fill out the goals and objectives. From a staff perspective, what we did is we first looked at all the new spending that the governor proposed. Some, of course, we had to do, the Medicaid, and Susan could touch on that. But there were some things that were his proposals, and to the degree, not whether or not they were good or bad or indifferent, I think the measure that the chairman, the subcommittee chairman, were using is if we're going to have as our priority employee compensation, then we need to make that as our first commitment. And once that is fulfilled, then we'll know what dollars we have left to take care of other things in the budget. The second thing that we did is we went back to the budget when we adopted it last year, Chapter 780. And there were a number of items in the budget in fiscal 18 that we sort of brought to the attention of the chairman and the subcommittee chairman with the question, knowing what you know today, would you have approved that last session? And then finally, the last thing we did is we looked at fiscal 18 and we said, what programs, when practical, could we level fund at the fiscal 17 level? So again, that's sort of how we went about identifying the resources, because at the end of the day, we did not tweak the revenues at all. The revenues were unfettered, if you will, from that which the governor and the Gaker and the JV recommended. The chairman did carry a bill, tax amnesty. And we did look at that, and we spent some time with our friends up on the 10th floor examining it. We had meetings with the tax department. We compared it to previous amnesty programs. And one could argue that when you look at the portfolio of accounts, that perhaps we should do more than $58 million. I will tell you one thing. The tax department has gotten very good at tax compliance. The data mining that they do with the programs and the software that they have, the access to information, 1099 information, and so on and so forth, really has benefited the Commonwealth in terms of that compliance. So there's a fine line between identifying accounts that you already know you can collect on and those that are truly ones that would fall in that bucket of amnesty. So while I know the Senate has a number of $31 million, we looked at that number, but in consultation with the chairman, we thought the best thing to do was not count our eggs, from those chickens yet, rather because we would not want to spend it. And instead, we were very concerned in conversations with Secretary Brown that perhaps what we needed to do is set up a reserve. And some of that comes from some of the discussions, concerns raised by the rating agencies, in particular S&P. So there are two amendments that you will see in the budget. One deals with amnesty. If any dollars over and above the $58 million, they'll go into a reserve fund. The second is, as I indicated, we made the decision early. The chairman communicated it to the governor and the secretary that we would not entertain adjusting the forecast during the mid-session. It's very tempting. We're doing well. We'll get the next revenue report will come in next week. And so the good news is we're well ahead of where we need to be, which takes pressure on making the forecast. And if we finish in June with excess dollars, that's good for us. And we have language then that would allow for not to, or to go into that same reserve. Again, that is just meeting the concern of the rating agencies, who understand that we're using our revenue stabilization account, but we're not going to have but $250 million in it afterwards. So, to them, it's about getting balances back. It's very important. Moving on, as I indicated, the priority of the committee was employee compensation. As the chairman, I think, noted on the House floor a couple of weeks ago, if you look at the state employees, they only have one employer to turn to, and that is the General Assembly. As it relates to general raises, state agencies have no authority to grant a general pay increase to your state classified worker. And that, for the most part, is true at your universities. They might be able to do a bonus for a classified worker, but they don't feel that they have the power. Faculty is another matter. The board's visitors take the posture that faculty employees are different, they're contractual, and that they have that ability to provide for pay raises. Some of the universities did that. Tony will touch on a little more on that when he talks about higher education and how we funded the faculty pay raise. Your state, your school teachers, as the chairman has noted, everybody, the flow of state dollars to be it colleges or to state agencies or to your school divisions, all was predicated on meeting the fiscal 16 revenue. We did not do it. It was very clear that if we failed to do it, that the pay raise trigger would not be pulled. At the end of the day, school employees are employees of the school board. The decision on pay raises is left solely to the school division. The General Assembly does not mandate pay raises. So, again, they, all but 12, I believe, did receive a pay raise. But at the end of the day, I think as the chairman again said, the state employees have only had one employer, and that is the General Assembly. So in there is dollars for 3%. That's restoring that which you all had provided for last year but did not get executed. Likewise, what you did for the state supported is you provided a 2%. We restored that. In addition, you restored the compression for your deputy sheriffs. And what you did for state police is you raised the starting salary of a trooper. You did a commensurate action with the Capitol Police. And then there are about 9 groups, and Michael will have a slide on it, that are fairly low paid. A lot of them are direct care in our training centers and our hospitals, their nursing, healthcare staff, if you will. So they'll be, in addition to the 3%, get an additional 2%. In K-12, again, this, there was some discussion about, well, can't we put back salary dollars to compensate those school divisions that might have made the decision, if you will. That certainly was something we looked at, but I think the goal that the committee made last year of reestablishing that lottery and getting it back fully funded at the 40% of that lottery that's not used to fund categorical programs, to get it back to your school divisions without strings attached, this was a major policy departure. Last time you did it, in 2010, we did have 40% going back in a per pupil amount, but you required a local match. And that was a big policy decision the General Assembly made last year. Now, if you're an education advocate, you would say, well, no, I prefer the local match, because that forces your local governments to have to come up with the dollars to give to your schools to match the state. But I think what the members did is they wanted to be very balanced. And they said, we can't burden our local governments. And if they choose to give them that money, that's great. But we're not going to require those school division or those local governments. And so that is very important. One of the things that is in the committee amendments last year when you reestablished it is that 50% for non-recurring, 50% for ongoing. We removed that limitation, and all 100% of it amounts to just over $218 million will be at the discretion of the school boards. In terms of health and human resources, Susan Master will touch on it, but there's about $28.5 million for the mental health package. I'd say one of the largest things that we did is, we've been monitoring the GAP program. When it was first proposed by the governor, the committee had concerns because it would have had a built-in waiting list. The amount of funding he had was not projected to cover the number of bodies that could be eligible. So we went into it very slow. We went in at 60% of federal poverty. Last year, we moved it up to 80%. This year, as part of that mental health package, we moved it to 100%. That will allow for 3,000, I believe, more individuals to receive mental health services. And we felt that was just a common sense way to, in addition to the other dollars, same-day access and supportive housing, to try to provide packaged services to individuals. Higher education, the objective there.
Robert, make sure you mention also when we went to the 100% about the additional add.
Yeah, well, we added the ARCS things, the substance abuse services, over to the GAP, so those things will get both.
All right, and Susan will touch on that. Higher education, when we looked at the budgets when it came over, it was a 5% cut to higher education. There was no reduction in the first year. The committee affirmed that decision or that recommendation of the governor. They were concerned, though, that 5% is not 5% to each agency. Because if you're a Longwood University and you have 95% of your student body that is in-state Virginians, okay, then the impact on that school is much greater than it is at the University of Virginia. 2/3 of the tuition collected at the University of Virginia comes from that 1/3 of out-of-state students. So their capacity is much greater. So the objective with the committee and with the help of the chairman and Delegate Cox is, in addition to directing, I think, $20 million directly to the institutions, $1 million was for the online, Tony will touch on that, but $20 million to achieve a goal that the universities would not have a total E&G cut greater than 1.4%. And that really equalized it, because again, and Tony could share with you that data, if you were to look at, if you just kept the cut in place, the impact on a Longwood, a CNU, a Radford, as it related to E&G was much greater for those schools. So that was our objective. It wasn't looking at the general fund, but it was looking at all funds, because all those dollars spend green at the university. Finally, in public safety, there were a couple of things. One of them, in addition to, of course, the state starting salary, last year you all began an initiative that the state police was very interested in and us pursuing to create a special operations division. So we did restore the funding in 18 for that. And then finally, for the last several years, the General Assembly has really, the House in particular, made an effort to increase funding for the domestic violence. We looked, we made some phone calls to Criminal Justice Services, found out, is there more federal money we can match? And there was. And so the decision of Chairman, and I know Delegate Pease was very instrumental, was let's put money in, because for that $1.5 million, we're going to pull down $6 million in federal dollars. So with that, here is just sort of the front page. I won't go over that. If you have questions, we can do it offline. But now I'm going to get into the meat of the matter with Michael.
Good afternoon. On the Compensation Retirement Subcommittee report, the committee is now recommending $70.2 million for a 3% raise for state employees effective July 10th, 2017, which show up on the August 1st paycheck, and $15.6 million for a 2% salary adjustment for state-supported local employees. A portion of this is funded by redirecting $56 million that was included in the increase budget for a 1.5% employee bonus, and $3.9 million that was included in the introduced budget for career development programs for the constitutional officers. Tony will go into greater detail about how the funding was determined for the colleges for the 3% increase. This slide just shows the breakout of the raises and the funding for the raises by salary group. $52.2 million for the non-higher education population, 8.7 for the faculty, 9.2 for the higher ed, other employees, and including classified. And there's also an increase of about $100,000 for the VETA rates. The VETA rates are increased to reflect the cost of the salary increase for the employees, so all of the other agencies will charge more for their computer technology services. This slide just shows the details on the targeted salary actions for the public safety personnel. What the subcommittee and committee did was they looked at the starting pay for a lot of the local police departments, Richmond, Henrico, Chesterfield County were looked at, and they were all around $43,000 a year entry level, which was substantially above what the Capitol Police and state police starting salaries were. So there's $14.6 million to increase the state police up to $43,000 a year, which makes them a little bit higher than most of the counties and cities. And there is $534,000 to increase the starting pay for the Capitol Police up to $42,750. In addition, there's $7.3 million for a compression adjustment for sheriff's offices and regional jails, which is similar to the one that was done for the state police 2 years ago. It's $80 per year of service for a sworn personnel, which means if you've been there 10 years, your salary goes up $800 per year. Slide 10 just shows the other targeted salary increases in the budget. There's 2.3 for the district court clerk for a plan that will be developed by the executive staff of the Supreme Court. And there's $2.9 million for these 9 high turnover positions, mostly in healthcare, that are listed here, the direct care nurse associates and registered nurses, as well as the therapists. Other recommendations of the compensation retirement includes $200,000 for JLAW to do a total compensation study, $140,000 for HRM to hire staff to handle succession planning related to House Bill 1555, which passed the House today, and $1.5 million in non-general fund for the Virginia retirement system to begin work on the new optional defined contribution plan created pursuant to House Bill 2251.
Michael, before you leave, I think we might have a typo on the first page. You say, employs a circuit court clerk, should not be dealt with this court. Go with front page, first one.
Maybe this one right there.
Page 1 has it wrong.
Page 1 got it wrong.
Subsequent slide has it right.
It's right there, but it's incorrect on page. Overall funding priorities on page 1. Page 2, excuse me.
Okay, in the open is the one, right? In the open. Okay, sorry.
We don't want the circuit court.
Yeah, I think we have it.
Yeah, they would think we got more money, we're saying we got.
Sorry, sir.
Just saying.
It is.
And now, in the area of higher education, it's about $38 million in total that was allocated. This includes the salary money for faculty. Robert's mentioned the $20 million. Essentially, dollars were allocated, looking at the total E&G budget and keeping that percentage down to 1.4% or less, looking at the institution's ability to generate their own non-general funds, and then also looking at in-state tuition, in-state general fund support. Several institutions have an amount of general fund support below the system average, and some of the dollars were allocated to raise that support. Extension and VIMS were restored in total, and NSU and BSU were still exempt from any cuts. Also, the reductions themselves were applied only to E&G. The increased budget came over, would have applied those cuts to the research programs, the various set out lines of things that you funded before. Those were exempt from the cuts. The cuts were isolated just to the E&G program. The $17.9 million for the faculty and for the classified salaries, we did a survey of all the institutions and asked them for 10 years, what have you done for salaries? Generally speaking, all or some of them, in every year during the 10 years when the state either didn't do anything or did something, they either did something on their own or added to what the state did. And especially some of the institutions like William & Mary, like UVA, that have greater revenue capacity, and actually raised their tuition. Remember, William & Mary's promise raised tuition for that purpose. So the recommendations, essentially, everybody's authorized the 3%. The general fund share of the 3%, though, takes into account what they did in 17. If an institution gave an increase in 17, or if they did a bonus in 17, it was assumed that they could do that money again and either offset or fully fund salaries, the 3% in 18. Those that didn't do anything in 17 would get funded as per usual with the fund splits. Those that did something would have a higher non-general fund requirement than they normally would have. This table just allocates or just shows you the allocation of all those $37.9 million by institution. Other recommendations. There was legislation this year that Doug Cox carried for the Online Virginia Authority. The money was originally placed in SHEV. Those dollars plus an additional $1 million in the second year is now a standalone item in the budget itself. There's some dollars for a partnership between Virginia Western Community College and Botetourt Schools for a mechatronics program. There's some dollars out there for Mary Washington to do some regional economic development and adult ed at their Stafford campus. There was some operating support for SHEV, as well as restoration in the second year of the VWIL cuts. There is restoration for the cuts to the state library that lets them resume their full days of operation, hours of operation, as well as the archival services that they provide. And then there's some restorations for the Jamestown 2019 commemoration. There were some savings items. Robert pointed out the basic question was, if you knew today, if you knew last year what you know today, would you have funded it? For the new items, there were 3 new items. They were basically eliminated to expand some programs that were out there. And then about $2.8 million of programs from last year of some brand new initiatives that were either level funded or were eliminated in the second year. In policy areas, there was some language at the New College Institute to help them refocus their mission and also hopefully leverage some assets that we have within higher education to be able to bring the programs to that part of the state in a cost-effective way and hopefully provide some opportunities for the people down there. There is some additional authority for the procurement at the community colleges, subject to DGS review, and then there's also some language related to the AP CLEP exams to get some standardization on that particular program. Any other questions?
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't have any jokes either, I'm sorry. budget as introduced, I just want to remind everybody, had no reductions, and the committee's recommendations don't reduce those funds either. But in total, the amendments add a net of just under $13 million in general fund to both direct aid and central office for the 16-18 budget, above the amounts that were in introduced in the HB 1500 budget. As Robert just mentioned, in the opening remarks, recommendations from the committee are focusing on more flexibility to our school divisions so that they can really tailor the use of those state dollars to those locally determined and targeted areas so that they can best fit the needs of their own individual students. Moving on, recommendations to the biggest one we have right there right now for amendments is to redirect the new one-time payment of that $55 million into the lottery PPA. You've heard a lot about that already. And we're adding to that another $6.1 million to fund it to go into the lottery PPA, bringing up that revised total, as Robert mentioned, just over almost $219 million, which again now reaches the committee's goal, the chairman's goal, of providing 40% of lottery dollars unencumbered back to the school divisions in the second year. So collectively, those two actions increase the actual per pupil amount from $225 up to $313, which is just about a 40% increase as well. There's also new language that's incorporated into the committee's amendment that expands the spending flexibility so that the school divisions can choose to use all of their lottery allocations on recurring expenses if they so choose to do so. And again, just as a reminder, there is no local match, which again, Robert mentioned right out of the gate. So going on, our 10-10-10 plan, a lot of discussion about that. There is $9 million in the second year to provide some financial assistance to those really smaller school divisions that have realized some real substantial declines in their average daily membership. And those are the ones that really struggle to have any economy of scale. And they're the three 10s are less than 10,000 students, have realized a decline of 10% or more in actual reported membership over a 10-year period from 06 to 16. I'm sorry, yes.
You're going to come up with a list of all those schools that qualify for the 10-10 members as well, right?
Yes, and I might point out, I can do a separate list altogether if you so choose, but in your handy handout there, the second year actually does have a column that adds in that $9 million, and you'll see that there are now 40 school divisions that are so listed in that allocation. We had 39, but we had one adjustment on membership, so now we're happy to say we have 40 school divisions that qualify for it. And I will go offline and look at that.
Just I think it's important to state that, when we looked at the whole issue of the LCI and the ADM, it was a sustained loss of students over time. So we didn't feel like a 2 or 3 year look back did any justice. For example, Henrico lost 1,500 students. You look at somewhere like Southern, and they got large school divisions, they have more elasticity. And I think we should point out as well, the lottery, the difference between what the Senate has done, what they did with the pay raise, because they actually used about $28 million of the lottery monies that we appropriated last year for 18 to make their pay raise work. So it's not really $84 million, they're taking 28 of existing monies that were there to be used as you saw fit.
Right.
To add to the 55.
Right now it is just for the raise, whereas before, in our language, Mr. Chairman, you all provide that flexibility so they could in fact do a raise if they wanted to, or something else, because again, I think Robert had mentioned, many of our school divisions, all but 12, have given a raise this year, and depending on what their finances and capabilities are next year, they may not be able to do that.
And I think our net K-12 spending is higher as well.
Yes, it
than
is.
the Senate.
Yes, it is. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, questions, any more questions? All right, moving on then. We do have some other spending items I just want to touch on right quick. $200,000 to provide through the Spark summer program for our at-risk youth down in the Newport News School Division area. The recommendations also include expanding our remedial summer school language to support a pilot in our public-private partnerships between selected school divisions and the YMCA. and we've got about $300,000 earmarked for that particular partnership, and we have seen sustained growth in reading and math skills over those summer months, which is why we feel it's a good use of the funds there. $175,000 for CTE, which is a vocational laboratory pilot. They're also down in Newport News. And then lastly, we have $50,000 for a partnership between VSU and our Chesterfield school divisions. Other questions? Moving on. There's $1 million recommended in the second year to support legislation. I've listed out there for you those 3 sub-bullets. For the sake of brevity, unless there's any questions, I'll move on. And then lastly, there you see almost $125,000 over the biennium we put in for a technical correction for some data submissions. Slide 24, we have recommendations that pick up some savings. There's about $1.5 million in the second year that the committee is recommending that is a level fund, the teacher residency program. Also, there's a new summer cyber camp funding. We're removing that along with some entrepreneurial leadership initiative. Also recommending to level fund our project discovery in the second year as well, so that 17 and 18 both roll at the same level of dollars. And then there's lastly a little bit of available balances in the new teacher improvement compensation initiative in both years as well. Moving on then, there is some language that we have recommended from the committee. First being to add some additional flexibility to the mixed delivery preschool grant recipients so that they can really exercise some greater latitude to achieve their goals and objectives in individual pilots. There's language to allow DOE and BCCS and Richard Bland to negotiate individual credit hours for dual enrollment courses. There's also language that directs Department of Education and Northern Community College also to contract with some nonprofit organizations for professional development related to computer science training of our teachers. And then we're also expanding the teacher scholarship program in terms of student eligibility so that our incoming freshmen can pursue a teaching career during their time in colleges, and we're providing tuition assistance for that as well. I'm going to wrap up very quick with DOE and central office. The committee does recommend that we're going to allow the Department of Health to maintain and continue the administrative duties of those 2 photo programs, food programs, that will transfer $57 million back over to them as photo dollars, along with the 20 FTEs that accompany the funding. Then we have some savings that are listed out there at the bottom of the slide for you. And unless you all have any questions, I will just say thank you and point you to our school division distributions, which I will clean up and send out the specific list.
Mr. Chairman, for those of you in the room that don't know, Danny Marshall came up with an idea to get superintendents on the phone and brief them on what we were trying to do in K-12. We had a number of superintendents dialed in. The chairman hosted the phone call. We walked through how the funding would work in the House budget, and I'll tell you, it was extraordinarily well received. One superintendent at the end said, and I quote, "I've been in superintendent here in the Commonwealth for 18 years, and I've never had a chance to talk to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, not once." And it was really, really impactful. And Danny Marshall brought the idea up, and the chairman posted the call. And I'll tell you, that's part of the transparency of working together around the Commonwealth. And I think you'll find that the House budget did that, and we should be in really good shape with your locality.
And Mr. Chairman, and to that point as well, not only has House Bill 1500 added new opportunities for public education and added new flexibility, I think it's really important for us to remind the members that's actually $1 billion more than the last biennial budget as well. So we really are, and I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your commitment and the committee's commitment to education.
Susie Nurse.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to skip right ahead to slide 29 and go over the behavioral health package. There's $28.5 million for behavioral health services in the amendments before you, $25.9 for community behavioral health and substance abuse services. There's $3 million matched with federal Medicaid money to expand the GAP program from 80 to 100% of the federal poverty level and add the addiction recovery and treatment services so they'll be able to avail themselves of that service as well. There's $5.2 million for community service boards to implement same-day intake and assessments for individuals. 5.3 for opioid treatment services. We've got $3.3 million for local inpatient services for adults, children, and geriatric patients, and this will help to divert them out of state facilities and to, when they're discharged, to help them get the community services they need. There's also an additional $2.5 million for discharge assistance. This is for individuals that are facing extraordinary barriers at our state facilities to community placement, and that will help to get them out there ready, medically ready to go out. They just are having some difficulties with some of the service needs that they need once they get into the community. There's $2 million for permanent supportive housing and $1 million for detoxification services, and then there's almost $1 million there for community geropsych teams to work with your nursing homes and geriatric patients, again, to divert them out of state facilities and help with the discharge. In addition, as part of this package, there's $2.1 million that's being allocated to your state facilities, primarily for additional staffing and medication needs. There's $500,000 in the Secretary's Office, Health and Human Resources, to prepare an implementation plan to transform the system to one that's really state-of-the-art and reflects best practices, trying to move the money and align it financially where it needs to be to serve people in the best environment, which is hopefully the community. That implementation plan is due on September 1st of this year. In terms of developmental services, there is amendment that would allocate an additional 144 family and individual support waiver slots, bringing the total number in fiscal year 18 to 344 slots. There is funding in the budget that would provide for those additional slots. And then there's an additional $430,000 that's recommended for the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to work with DEQ to conduct a site assessment at Central Virginia Training Center, which, as you know, is slated to close by fiscal year 2021. In terms of Medicaid funding, first several items pertain to funding for your nursing facilities. There's money for nursing home inflation payments in fiscal year 18. That's $5.5 million of general funds matched with federal dollars. That fully restores inflation. As you remember, last year you did about half of the inflation factor. This will bring it fully in line for 18. There's also an additional $3.3 million matched with federal funds again to increase the nursing facility payments for their prices for direct and indirect care. And then there's an additional 1.6, again, matched with federal Medicaid dollars for those nursing facilities to correct some payments to a number of facilities that were adversely impacted when we moved to a different nursing home system to the price-based system from a reimbursement system, and they were put into a different peer group, and nobody realized the adverse effect that would have on their payments, so that was corrected. There's $1.4 million, again, matched with federal Medicaid dollars to restore hospital inflation for CHKD. That's the Children's Hospital down in the Tidewater area. There's $1.3 million, again, with matching federal dollars to implement the JLARC recommendations. This will be through budgetary language. This picks up most of the recommendations that were in the JLARC report on improving fiscal management of the Medicaid program. And then I'll talk in a second about funding for the bills related to that. In terms of Medicaid policy changes, the amendments do restore language prohibiting Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. There's also language to allow publicly funded nursing homes, there's about 5 of them in the state, to be excluded from the managed long-term supports and services program, which you know is MLTSS. And then there's additional language authorizing Medicaid supplemental payments to hospitals that are affiliated with the EVMS and the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. And then finally, there's language authorizing Medicaid supplemental payments to qualifying private hospitals for charity care that's provided through agreements with state agencies as approved by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. The legislation that was adopted in committee, the funding for that is listed here on this slide. I won't read through that. It's there for you to see. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The committee's also recommending the elimination of most of the fees that were increased in the Health and Human Resources area of the budget. For instance, the restaurant inspection fee, amendments would add back funding to maintain the restaurant inspection fee at $40. The shellfish sanitation facility inspection fees, those are eliminated as well. And then the elimination of the proposed fee for behavioral health adult service providers, there's funding for that that was eliminated on that as well. In terms of program restorations, there's about $2.5 million in Health and Human Resources that were recommended for restorations that were cut in the House Bill 1500 as introduced. Again, I won't read through those. Those are fairly familiar programs to most of you over the years that we've funded. And I'll just go on and just mention the TANF funding. There are a number of amendments to provide TANF funding for a variety of programs. There's $10 million for community wealth building and employment and training programs. There's $4.8 million for a child support supplement. That was in the House budget last year. It never came out of conference, so this committee is recommending that again. $2.5 million to increase TANF benefits in localities with the lowest payments, Group 1 localities. $2 million to provide a 2.5 increase in TANF benefits, and then some additional money that was in the introduced budget, and then a little bit more for the in terms of the Child Advocacy Centers. You backfilled some of the TANF money that was in the introduced budget and backfilled that with general fund dollars to help them match their VOCA grant. And then there's a transfer of 3.7 to the child care block grant money for child daycare subsidies for low-income working families. They did eliminate $6 million for the long-acting reversible contraceptives, and the amendments leave a TANF balance at the end of the biennium of $55 million. Lastly, I just wanted to take you through the savings in the Health and Human Resources area. The first one is the continued prohibition on personal attendant overtime. That was in last year's budget. That just continues that. There was a supplant of about $5.3 million of general funds with federal opioid crisis grant dollars. An elimination of this gap analysis of the behavioral health system in favor of doing a planned implementation strategy for the transformation of that system. Some Medicaid forecast savings of about $3.7 million. Some behavioral health care savings by expanding the GAP program, Medicaid state recoveries efforts, and I won't read through the rest of them, but they're there for you to answer. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, starting with state police, as Robert mentioned in the beginning, the subcommittee report included a restoration of funding and positions for the Special Operations Division. There's also a restoration of $206,000 in fiscal 18 to open a new area office in the New River Valley. This was an item that was included in Chapter 780 last session. The report also includes $330,000 in 4 positions to conduct background checks of child care center employees and volunteers. There's language in central appropriations exempting state police from VETA for cybersecurity and management tools. The language requires their superintendent and CIO to present a report next fall with detailed timelines and costs of transitioning all state police IT responsibilities from VETA sometime in the future. The language also includes $2.9 million the second year to be used upon completion of the report in order to address necessary IT projects. Moving on to DCJS, as Robert also mentioned, there's the $1.5 million in general funds the second year for local sexual assault and domestic violence victim programs. This will allow those programs to draw down $6 million in federal matching funds. Relating to a couple of House bills, there's $154,000 the second year for up to 4 pilot model addiction recovery programs. This is related to House Bill 1845 from Delegate Cox. There's also $10,000 the second year for House Bill 1853. I won't read the title of that, the fund that is established by the bill, but that was from Delegate Gilbert. There is a reduction to the appropriation for HB 599 funding each year. This is a technical adjustment to reflect lower assumed fiscal year 17 general fund growth
than was assumed when Chapter 780 was passed last session. For ABC, there are increases in the net profit transfer each year due to a higher assumed growth in sales. There are also increases in the transfer from efficiencies each year. A language amendment also directs the agency to transfer its field services vehicle to VDEM for VDEM to use it as a mobile command center. In the Secretary's office, the report includes $1 million the second year towards the state's cost match to complete a Corps of Engineer flood control study in Hampton Roads and Northern Neck. For the Compensation Board, there's an amendment authorizing 2 multi-jurisdictional Commonwealth attorneys to be hired to focus on prosecuting the insurance fraud and to be paid for out of the insurance fraud fund. For DVS, there's $600,000 in positions the second year to complete their transformation of the Virginia Veteran and Family Support Program. This is one of the recommendations from the working group established last year to address concerns by a JLR review of veteran services. There's also a couple of amendments establishing the Veteran Services Foundation as a standalone budget item pursuant to House Bill 2148. And finally, the report includes $1.1 million in fiscal 18 to fill vacant judgeships. These additional funds will increase the number of funded judgeships from 408 to 412. There's additional funding the second year for the cost of substitute judges.
Mike, if I can, just so the members will know, the Senate went the other direction. They reduced it from, I think, 408 to 405 or something like that. I think they swept savings, et cetera. So
They swept about just under 700,000, I think.
So I talked to your counterparts in the Senate, if you have a real desire, someone might be high on the list as far as 1.0 or 2.9.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. $3.8 million is included the second year for the executive secretary to work with the state police superintendent on developing and implementing a statewide electronic summons system. The language does require a plan to be presented to the money committees next fall before the funding can be used to buy state police's equipment and software. Finally, there's a transfer to the general fund from the fiscal year 2016 balances of the criminal fund. Talking to the Supreme Court staff, they have sufficient funding for the rest of the biennium for the criminal fund. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Good afternoon. The Capital Outlay and General Government Subcommittee, the first line is just the highlights of the general government portion. There's $1.2 million for 15 new positions with the Capitol Police, including 3 K-9 units. There's $100,000 for the Division of Legislative Services, pursuant to the passage of House Bill 1566, which requires them to hire professional occupational regulatory analysts. There's $150,000 for the Foundation for Humanities, which is housed at UVA, to work with a new work task force that was created pursuant to House Bill 2296 to identify historical sites related to formerly enslaved African Americans. And there's $1.5 million pursuant to House Bill 1650, which provides compensation to Keith Allen Harwood, who was incarcerated for over 30 years. Next, we'll move to the capital outlay action.
In capital outlay, basically, because we did the large bill last year, most of the recommendations are fairly modest. The budget itself had about $276 million in there. There was some repurposing. One was to provide for planning for the ABC warehouse to get better project costs, project location, etc. It was a change between our shifting the Buckingham wastewater project for the Greensville Correctional Center. They had some emergency repairs. There were some fire safety projects needs within the Department of Military Affairs, the VIMS Eastern Shore Lab, and then some renovations at the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research in Danville. The Total for all the actions, essentially, we were able to reduce the amount of debt that was proposed by about 70 million, and also save about $10.8 million of general fund.
I think it's important for members to note that 70 million less than what the governor had proposed in his budget, so you're adding to the structural balance of the budget.
Yes, sir. In capital planning, essentially there were 4 new projects that were proposed. This would eliminate them. When you approved the bill last year, the chairman's capital bill last year, you had already approved 21 projects in there for planning, and it was unclear as to whether these would start jumping ahead of ones that you've already had done. Other than the ABC warehouse, that one you did add to it. And by doing this, you also were able to revert some planning pool balances that were out there for use in the budget by $10 million. There were some.
On 4 projects, just so you know, we're not picking on the governor per se, but back in '08, we started with a 6-year plan process, trying to go through and get things to the queue.
And those projects are in the 6-year plan.
Right, but
just not ready for the next step. And the capital language, there were some language changes. It added the Prince William Adult Detention Center to the eligible projects list for reimbursement. There was some additional money put out there for Department of Conservation and Recreation for property acquisition. And again, in last year's actions, you had provided them money for property acquisition. The idea was for them to develop what they already have before buying and gathering more property. There was some duplicative language in Part 4 related to Department of Procurement. You passed the bill to do the same. So that was removed. Policy actions, there's some language that clarifies for CCAM, access to funding that you previously provided. William and Mary provided some alternative financing language that you provided to others. The other items here, sales of property, scope changes are very technical. Old Dominion and Radford have some athletic projects, and this authorizes those projects to move forward and clarifies the treatment of the debt service and fees. DMA, again, non-reverting fund. They're selling property. This will hold the money in that non-reverting fund so that they can move forward with some of their federal projects in a more expeditious manner. And then there were some third-party leases on solar projects, which again was somewhat duplicative to legislation they've already dealing with. If there are no questions.
Got it, man.
I checked before I came.
Yeah, you spent time with Michael, didn't you?
The special project review committee this year was a special subcommittee to look at local fiscal distress. Chairman Jones established this special subcommittee following Secretary Brown's report in September, and he appointed Delegate Landis as chairman. We began this process at our annual retreat in November. We took a very broad view and narrowed it down to Virginia and taking a look at our own backyard. And what we found was that this was a problem that many states in the nation were dealing with. It was just something that was unfamiliar to Virginia. So we looked at the broad national view, saw some situations and how these states responded to local fiscal distress. And then we also heard from the auditor. She discussed the current monitoring system and suggested some modifications that would help us. And then we also heard from the Commission on Local Government, and they showed us their recent analysis of localities in Virginia, some of which are approaching similar situations. Following this, we created a work group that was comprised of the House Appropriations, Senate Finance Committee staffs, Legislative Services, Secretary of Finance, DPD, Commission on Local Government, Housing, the Auditor, VACO, and VML. There was a lot of information, a lot of data, and a lot of discussion that went back and forth in a very short period of time. And we coalesced around 3 recommendations rather quickly. The budget language contains these 3. First is an improved monitoring system for the auditor that includes follow-up requests for more data from localities that get on her radar. She can then make a determination as to whether or not further action is necessary. Once she does, she notifies the governor and the chairman of House Appropriations and Senate Finance Committees, and the governor is tasked with developing and managing an intervention process which will begin with an assessment team from the state to go in there and gather further data and a deeper analysis on the scene. Following this team's work, they will make a recommendation as to how we should proceed. That may include public assistance, could be private assistance, some type of hybrid of both. We didn't want to commit to anything because we wanted to maintain the flexibility in the system, which several groups and people that deal with this, that have expertise in this, complimented us on our very flexible approach. The last thing we did was put in place some limited funding on the Secretary of Finance's budget so that he can continue to address some of the local fiscal distress that he's already identified as the first of the year. And we'd like to continue to look at this problem in the interim session. Yes?
I'd just like to say in the public forum that I absolutely commend this necessary step, Mr. Chairman. I hope someday we have a parallel step that deals with fiscal imbalance, structural imbalance of localities.
I would add, I think that the Senate has a budget amendment they're going to create a standing subcommittee, or they want to create one that's going to deal, I think, with that issue in a direct and a tangential way.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Moving next to the Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry. The committee amendments that will be before your consideration Thursday focus on restoring cuts to some of the core departmental programs and eliminating proposed fee increases. Like the other areas of government you've heard, the amounts to this were generally achieved by reducing funding levels for new initiatives or program expansions that have been adopted last session. In line with the policy to remove all fees, there were two within the Secretariat: eliminated proposed fee increase in the Department of Agriculture's non-restaurant food inspection fee, and also eliminated a new fee that had been proposed at forestry for silvicultural inspections. In both cases, general funds were provided to offset the amounts that would have been generated by the fees. The committee amendments also proposed to fully restore funding for the reforestation of timberlands program. By code, the department is expected to match industry contributions under this program. This is something that had not been achieved for well over a decade. Last session, you were finally able to fully match the industry-imposed severance taxes, so the committee felt it was important to maintain that commitment this year, and also provides just over $100,000 to eliminate some proposed diversion of the RG funds to support other work. There's also a full restoration of just under $300,000 in coyote and black vulture control program, which will pull down a like amount of federal funding. As mentioned, these reductions were achieved by limiting some new initiatives, just under $260,000 over the biennium. Was eliminated from an unfilled organic specialist position that had been authorized last year. The removal of second-year funding of just under $375,000 for a new farm development grant program. There's also a $280,000 reduction in the APHID grant program. We still retain $1.5 million in the second year for grants in this program, which is still above the FY16 funding level. Moving next to natural resources, the proposed amendments provide an additional $3 million general fund for agency activities compared to the introduced budget. In addition, the amendments provide just under $8.3 million from the Water Quality Improvement Fund Reserve to fund ag best management practices. Just under $1 million goes to technical assistance, soil and water conservation districts, and the remaining $7.3 million for on-the-ground ag DOP cost share assistance.
And if I can, before you leave that slide, just talking to Steve, we had a lot we did last year in the quality improvement reserve with B&Ts, et cetera, so we have language in the budget, I believe, that works on a plan over the next handful of years to have level funding or some type of plan to get to 2025, these big things.
because the program is generally dependent on revenues from surpluses, there are a lot of fluctuations, which also cause trouble with the soil and water conservation districts. Some years they need additional staff and can't get the work out on the ground fast enough, but you don't want to ramp up too much when you know the funding might be lower.
$60 million was in that?
Over $60 million last year.
So it was kind of up and down, so we're trying to level that off over time.
At the Department of Environmental Quality, the committee provides $1.35 million for the purchase of a vertical extensometer for the Hampton Road Sanitation District project, looking at addressing land subsidence by injecting treated wastewater back into the aquifer. $350,000 is also provided to DEQ so they can hire the outside contractors required to undertake the study required by House Bill 1974. And within that agency overall, all of their cuts are offset by the use of some non-general fund balances they have, ensuring that program activities of the agencies continue at current levels. Within DCR, there's a partial restoration of some funding that had been provided last year for the development of handicapped accessible bike trails at Swift Creek. This is matched by some rather large private contributions. There's also the restoration of language adopted by the General Assembly last year, prohibiting the acquisition of parkland without General Assembly approval. There were a number of small amendments at the Marine Resources Commission. There's language restoring the Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Tournament they proposed to eliminate. There's also elimination of a proposed increase in commercial fishing and gear licensing fees, and general fund support was put in to offset the revenues that would be generated by that fee. And finally, defers the privatization of oyster lease surveying services and provides general support, fund support for that program. The Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, there is a transfer of $650,000 each year from that agency to the general fund to help address the budget shortfalls. No cuts were applied against them in either the October reduction plan or in House Bill 1500. And finally, Historic Resources fully restores the Battlefield Preservation Fund appropriation included last year. It includes funding to preserve historic African American graves in the same fashion as has been done for years with Revolutionary and Civil War graves pursuant to legislation that came through the committee.
In Commerce and Trade, our primary focus was to preserve and protect funding for our overall priorities while trying to redirect some limited resources towards some economic development priorities and job growth. We managed to restore funding on several initiatives in the amount of approximately $7.8 million for the biennium. And we also managed to redirect $2 million general funds to higher education research, restoring funding for the NOVA project in North Virginia and some of the partnerships we have with our universities. We also put $7.5 million general funds for the biennium back into the DCHD Go Virginia initiative. The 9 regions approved by the Go Virginia Board have been working hard in order to submit their applications for assessment grants, which will lead to requests for funding of projects that are approved by the board in the upcoming months. And we put the disbursements in the 3 areas. The first year, $3.6 million, is for the organizational and capacity building activities that they need first and up front. Second year, FY18, is $2.15 in that same capacity building account, plus $1.75 in the account based upon population. We also passed out the Virginia Research and Investment Committee bill. This had some technical adjustments to it with language cleanup essentially, but we also did 2 other things. The first was to provide FOIA protections for those that submit applications for funding. Some of the material that they submit is sensitive, and the discussions that surround that needed to be protected. Secondly, we transferred the responsibility for updating the Commonwealth Research and Technology Strategic Roadmap from the Center of Innovative Technology to the VRIC. Lastly, we included some budget language in there so that the VRIC is able to conduct a study that is essentially an assessment of the research assets and commercialization assets that we have in the Commonwealth now, as well as some ongoing collaborations so that they can better determine, when they do update that map, where we can better target our limited research and commercialization investment dollars. In order to do these things, we had three things essentially that we did. The first was we eliminated any new spending in the Secretariat. The second is something Robert alluded to in the very beginning by leveling certain funding programs. And the third was to capture some savings based upon schedule changes for some of the incentive packages that we have ongoing. After taking a look at these things, we were able to determine that $5.5 million we would be able to have now and still provide for these initiatives in the future when the time came. Questions?
Mr. Chairman, moving last to transportation, in terms of funding levels, you'll see an increase of $136 million non-general fund the first year, offset by a reduction of just under $38 million in the second year, all resulting from forecast adjustments, just as you've seen in the general fund. The second bullet shows you the breakout between the two largest agencies of those funding levels. In terms of positions, the amendments do allow for an additional 10 positions at VDOT for expanded toll operations, especially with the I-66 project coming online. At DRPT, there was a request for 6 additional FTEs to help with rail projects. The committee amendments removed 2 of those positions and allow them to take off the top 5% instead of the requested 7% share of their rail funds to fund these positions. The remaining amendments were all language related, looking at increasing accountability, promoting reform and transparency. There are 2 language amendments to help ensure that needed reforms are instituted at Lamar as part of the upcoming multi-jurisdictional compact renegotiation. The first is identical to the enactment clause included in House Bill 2136. The second directs the Secretary to initiate a review of the conditions of WMATA, specifically looking at strategies to reduce growth and labor cost, address safety and reliability, and look at some options to improve their efficiency over time. In terms of the Dulles Airport funding, there's a language amendment which just amends the existing language related to the provision of the general support for the facility to ensure that continued efforts are made to maximize their revenue generation at the facility by looking at developing some of the non-airport acreage that they have. The authority has met the requirements for receipt of the general funds and been certified by the Secretary. To date, they have signed a long-term lease agreement with United Airlines, and as you saw last week, they have also just attracted Air India to come into the facility as well. The Department of Aviation, there's language to ensure that all aviation grants coming from the Commonwealth Trust Fund are used solely for code-authorized purposes, which are capital in nature, and requires the department to provide an audit report on funding usage over the past 3 years in light of some concerns that some of these funds might have been used inappropriately. There is also language requiring an annual report on revenues generated from toll roads, both public and private, which would include amounts imposed and collected from toll violations, civil penalties, and administrative fees. This is an issue many of you have heard complaints about over recent years. Lastly, the amendments before you recognize the repayment of $20 million that were provided to Virginia Beach for the light rail expansion, which is now not going forward. Because that project is not moving forward, the funds will be redeposited to the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund. There was no effort to earmark those funds consistent with the committee's overall policy of trying to hand out transportation funds in a more objective manner. Lastly, there's an amendment which would authorize the Secretary of Finance to issue a treasury loan in the amount of $1.7 million for 3 years to compensate the city of Richmond, city of Portsmouth, for lost personal property tax revenues due to the renegotiated lease for the big port facility in Portsmouth. They assume that the planned expansion of that facility will allow the city to repay that back in just about 3 years when there's some large purchases of cranes and other equipment. Any other questions?
All right, well, that's the briefly, if you have any questions, now's the perfect time to ask them. I did have a member who wanted me to point out many, when we came here back last month, or we read back, I guess, last year, the hole that we had in our budget, they wondering how we have the initiatives before you today that we have. Well, we did really three things. We pretty much eliminated all new spending. We level funded programs, I should say, and we made choices to redirect those dollars into priorities that we had as a body. I think what we've heard throughout the public hearing process across the Commonwealth. So with that, for open mic, so to speak, at questions, please ask those, and we'll do our best to answer them. Wow, easy crowd.
Let's see the good or bad.
And I hope that what you've seen today is a lot, working in Portsmouth, working with our colleagues in the House, and that we all represent the same number of citizens. There's 100 of us in the House, and we try to listen to the small group meetings and through members coming to us to try to address the needs that exist in your district and in our Commonwealth. So with that, I want to thank staff for their wonderful job. Let's give them a hand. On the last 3 weekends I've been here, they have been here on Saturday and Sunday, and both Susan and Susan were here at 9:30 this past Saturday night working to get everything together to be ready for yesterday, for Sunday. So thank you very much. We'll see you on the floor tomorrow.